good to see you all again tonight. We're in the last night of our lesson. Let me get my clicker here. And we will get started. So, we've been talking about being the light of the world, right? We talked about our philosophy here, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, right? The scripture is useful, it's inspired by God, it helps us to do every good work, right? We need it. That's why we want to study it so much. That's why we want to spend time diving into these topics. That's why we make these classes and things freely available to everybody. We want anybody to come and learn more about the Bible so that they can get better and better at doing what God wants them to do, right? We also talked about the importance of, we talked about light and darkness, right? This contrast between the two. Life and death, salvation and destruction, right? Good and evil. We talked about walking with God. We talked about being the light of the world. We talked about Jesus being the light of the world. And He's the first one, right? He's the true light, right? He's the one that gives life to men, right? And that's a very important thing to think about, right? And Jesus says that over and over again, I am the light of the world. We saw in the Gospel of John. But we saw that Jesus tells His disciples in the Sermon on the Mount, you are the light of the world, right? So we're lights in the world. We saw Paul and going around talking about how God had made him a light for the nations, right? We Christians are lights to go out into the world, right? To bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth. Right? We're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end, but that was one of the points from yesterday, right? So today we want to talk about this idea of, are we shining or are we hiding, right? We're going to look a little more deeply into this hiding under a basket, right? Or up on a lampstand. What is the position of our life here, right? Before we do that, though, I want to go through a little experiment. Now, most of the light we see, you look around the room, most of it is going to be reflected light. All right, we've got the lights in the ceiling. They're shining down on us and reflecting off of me and you into different things. Now, if you look at this screen, that's actually generating the light and shooting it out straight, right? It's not reflecting off anything. It's coming straight from the TV. So even if all these other lights are off, you can still see them, right? But imagine a situation. We have two rooms, okay? Two identical rooms in size, right? They have the same, just one light bulb at the top in the middle, right? But there's one difference between those rooms. One of the rooms is this white or mostly white. You can pick a color. It can be kind of like this, right? But the other room is painted black, like ultra black. There's a kind of really dark black paint that absorbs like 99% of light that's put on, right? Super dark. Imagine those two rooms. Now, you've probably never seen anything quite that dark before, right? Because anything we see that's black, oh, this is black, right? But they're still kind of reflective, right? There's still things bouncing off of them. This is a really, like a true black. There's a video on YouTube, and there's a link there's an address here in the notes if you want to go look at it. But I got some pictures, right? So this guy did this experiment, right? And he has this room here, and you can see it's just this kind of insulation. It's white, it's printed on, but it's mostly white and open. He's got one light up here in the ceiling shining down, and it looks like a normal room, right? The camera's like, oh, here's a guy in a room, everything's bright. But this is the same room. But it's black. With the same light. But look how much darker he is, right? Now maybe his face is about the same color, right? But everything else, look at the really harsh shadow over his neck. You can't even see his neck, right? But here, you can see it just fine. Because the light is bouncing off the walls, bouncing off the floor, coming back up, hitting him at different angles, right? And so it's bright, because it reflects. But this, all the light coming from that bulb, unless it hits him directly and goes straight toward the camera, you can't see it, right? It disappears. It goes away. He did a different experiment where he held up a piece of cardboard, white cardboard, right? And you can see it's reflecting the light, right? Just like you would expect. But then he took it and he tilted it down just a little bit, right? You can see the top edge of it there, right? He just bent it like that, and suddenly you can't see it anymore, right? There's no light coming up from the floor or from the wall or anything. It's like it disappeared, right? Unless it's directly facing that light and bouncing out at the camera, you can't see it. Right? But then he said, well, what if I fold that cardboard, right? It's a white cardboard. Now it's reflecting the light back onto itself, and suddenly you can see it, even though it's at the same angle, right? I thought this was very interesting. Just we don't see a room like that usually in life, right? We're just used to kind of living, being surrounded by light in all these ways. But if you're really in a place that's that dark, right, it's a very different experience, right? So imagine for a moment yourself, right? Imagine Jesus. He's the true light of the world, right? Imagine him as that single light bulb in that black room. He's shining out, but it's not reflecting off anything, right? It's just going out and absorbing into the walls. It's going away. Now, if something's in there, right? If there's a person in there, they'll be revealed, right? You can see them. But, what happens if you turn away from the light? Well, then your back will be lit up and your face will be dark, right? You can still hide in the dark. Right? Not everything's exposed. But imagine we are reflecting that light. You have the cardboard, when you have it like this, you fold it up and suddenly you can see it again. Right? Imagine that Jesus is that light, but we are other bits of kind of reflective stuff, shining that light of Jesus into different parts of the room. Right? Eliminating all those shadows and dark places that are hiding things that you can't see. Right? Or imagine more of Jesus' original story, right? His original analogy. You're like a lamp in a place, right? In a house. Jesus is the true light, right? But he's, you take a fire and you light the lamp, right? The lamp doesn't have any fire on its own, right? It doesn't have any light by itself. It's got to get that energy to start glowing, right? But then once it's doing that, you can take it. It'll shine the room. It'll light it up, right? Unless you hide it away, right? So he says, well, why would you light a lamp and then just put it under a basket? Put it under the bed. Put it down in the cellar where you can't see it, right? You want to keep it in the room where everyone is, so that everyone can see, right? So, what does Jesus mean about putting this light under a basket? And I think we kind of understand it roughly, but let's talk about some of the different contexts that he uses this statement. Because, like I said, he says it about 4 times in the Gospels, right? We have, you are the light of the world. That's only in there one time, but this thing about do men light a lamp and put it under a basket, he says that 3 or 4 times. So let's look at some other ones. The first one we saw yesterday is in the Sermon on the Mount. It's between the Beatitudes and Jesus' discussion of the law, right? He's talking about what kind of people we need to be, right? How, even if we're oppressed in the world and we face all these difficulties, we can still be happy, even if we're persecuted, right? And that it's not about what we've heard in the law and these things in the past. It's about really doing what God wants us to do, right? And in the middle of that, he has this statement, right? You're the light of the world. City on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house, right? That's the purpose, right? If you have a light, you can put it there where everybody can see it. And he says this, in the same way. That's a very important statement, right? In the same way. So we see these ideas are connected. Right? Just like you wouldn't light a lamp and hide it away where no one can see it, in the same way, you let your light shine before others. Right? You be that light that other people can see. Right? Fill the room with your light so that so that people will see your good works. They'll glorify your Father in the heavens. Right? This is the purpose. Right? It's pretty straightforward. Right? Make sure we do our good works where people can see them to bring glory to God. Now it's interesting. There's an interesting thing here, because later in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to say something very strange. He's going to say, don't do your acts of righteousness. Don't do all these good deeds, giving to the poor and your fasting and your prayers. Don't do those things where people can see them. Right? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Right? Do those things in secret so only God can see. And God will reward you. And you kind of think, well, wait. How are we supposed to do it in secret, but also do it where people can see it? Right? Isn't that kind of a contradiction? Not really. Right? Because what Jesus is fighting against in that other part is people doing things just to be seen by men, so that they can get glory for doing these great things. Right? Wow, that guy's so religious. He really says his prayers very well. Or wow, he must have been fasting for a long time. I don't think I could do that. That guy must really be devoted to God. Or, wow, did you see how much money he put into the offering plate? Or that he gave that poor family over there? Wow, this guy is, Jesus is saying, don't announce it with trumpets when you're giving to the poor. Stand out on the street and say, look, we're helping the poor. Right? Makes me think about whenever there's a storm here or a disaster, what happens? The government has supplies. Oh, we're going to give this to these people, right? But what do the politicians always want? They want their name on that bag, right? They want to stand there. They want to be the ones handing it off to the people. So everyone say, wow, yeah, the president was here, the mayor was here, he gave me this, right? So that you'll vote for him later, right? They want the praise of men. They want their name to be bigger. It's not about, we need to help people, right? And we need to help them right now. So don't worry about what's on the bag. Just send it, right? No, I'm sorry. This came from somewhere else. We need to repack it completely with my name on it so that people will know it came from me. No, that's not good, right? That's the thing Jesus is fighting against here, right? Because that doesn't glorify God, that's glorifying yourself. But if we do our good deeds in secret, it's okay that people see it. And obviously, if you're going to give money to someone, it's hard to give money to someone and did not know that you gave it to them. Right? There's some ways you can do it anonymously, but it's difficult. Right? It's okay when you're doing good things for people. You're helping people, someone's sick and you want to visit them, right? They're going to know that you're there, right? That's the whole point. But you don't have to tell everybody else, oh yeah, I always go and visit this person and that. If you're just trying to get glory for yourself, that's not going to be good. But if other people are saying, wow, did you know that he's going around, he's doing all this, right? And they'll say, wow, God is good. Right? People will see the good things that you're doing, like we talked about yesterday. Make your behavior so excellent, so good that even though people say bad things about you, it's not true, right? They slander you like an evildoer, but really, they know that what you're doing is right. They know that you're doing good things, right? So they can't truthfully say anything bad about you. This is what Jesus wants us to be doing, okay? But this is just one context. Let's look at a different one. In the book of Luke, chapter 11, Jesus makes some similar teachings to the Sermon on the Mount. He teaches his disciples how to pray. Right? He talks about, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find. A lot of the things that show up in the Sermon on the Mount also appear here in Luke chapter 11. And there he says, no one after lighting a lamp puts it in a cellar or under a basket, but on a stand, so that people who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. Therefore be careful, lest the light in you be darkness. If your whole body is full of light, having no part in the dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light. Okay, so I said this is in the Sermon on the Mount. this part here, also the eye of the lamp of the body, that is in the Sermon on the Mount too. Now, have you ever wondered what Jesus is talking about? What does he mean when he's talking about the eye and the lamp of your body? You don't want your body full of darkness, you want it full of light. Do you have any idea what he's talking about? It's a little hard to figure out sometimes. But we have some clues in
about God.
The Sermon on the Mount. That's true. It is about God. In the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about don't store your treasure in heaven. Right? I'm sorry. Do store your treasure in heaven. Don't store your treasure on earth. Right? Because what happens? People can steal it. It can get destroyed. Right? Put it in heaven. That's where your heart will be. Your heart's going to be where your treasure is. Right? Then he says this. The eye is the lamp of your body. You know. And then he says you can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and money. Right? He's telling them not to be greedy. Right? He's telling them not to have their treasure here. So what does that have to do with the eye as the lamp of the body? Well, if we go back to the Old Testament, there's a Hebrew expression talking about having an evil eye. Right? Here where it says your eye is healthy or when your eye is bad. Right? If your eye is evil, that's an example of someone, there's a time where in their culture, in the old law, every 7 years, if you owed any debts, those were canceled. You know that? So like if you were going to borrow money from someone, you had to pay them back before the 7 years was up. If you didn't, you don't have to pay them anymore. Right? So, you know, if someone borrows money in the first year, that's 6 years that you can get money from them paying back the debt. Right? But what if somebody comes to you in the 6th year? You know, at the end of the year, there's just a few months left. Hey, could I borrow like 10,000? You know, I really need to do this thing. And you think, you're going to borrow 10,000 from me, but next month I have to cancel that debt. You're not going to pay it back in 1 month. I'm not going to give you that. Right? And so he says, if your eye is evil, you look down on your poor brother, you think, he's never going to pay me back. I'm not going to give to him because you know. Now, if it was the first year and you had a lot of time where you could bother him to get paid back, then you would do it, maybe, right? But that's kind of the expression here. So this idea of your eye being good or your eye being bad has to do with how you look at other people and how you treat them when they're in need, particularly, right? Are you looking around, you know, for opportunities to help people, right? Are you there shining a light into them, right? Or when someone asks you, like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? I can't do it. That's an interesting kind of thought, right? But he says, if you're like that, if your eye is bad like that, then your whole body's full of darkness, right? It doesn't matter what's going on the outside. The light inside of you is darkness. And that's pretty bad, right? You know, if your light is darkness, then you don't have anything, right? So this is something to be avoided, right? And the other context here is, you know, Jesus cast out a demon, and they said, oh, he's not doing that by God. He's worshiping demons. He's got a demon inside of him, and that's how he's doing this. You know, Jesus is saying, you wicked people, right? And then even though he just did this thing, other people are coming up to him and saying, oh, show us a sign. If you want us to believe you, do a sign. Do a miracle so we can know. You know, how many miracles has he already done? Everyone's talking about it, but they want to see their own miracle. Right? I can't believe it just because they said it. Right? Just because there's 1,000 people here that all got healed. Oh, no, you better show me something else. And Jesus says it's an evil generation that asks for a sign. And you're not going to get one. Actually, you're going to get one, the sign of Jonah. Right? And that was going to be about him going and dying, being in the earth, just like Jonah was in the belly of the fish. Right? And he talks about how in Jonah's day, what happened? Jonah went to Nineveh. The people of Nineveh were very wicked. Right? But Jonah told them, he gave them God's message that their city was going to be destroyed, and they repented. And so God basically says, look, or Jesus says, look, I'm greater than Jonah. Right? And yet you won't listen to me. Right? So in the judgment, the people of Nineveh are going to stand up and they're going to condemn you because they listened when Jonah came to them. But you don't listen when I came. Right? Or Solomon, met the Queen of Sheba. She's going to stand up and she's going to condemn you because she listened to Solomon, but I'm greater than Solomon and you won't listen to me. Right? That's kind of the context when Jesus says this. They have the light. They have the Word of God. Right? They have the law. But what are they doing with it? Are they doing anything good with it? No. Right? They're just greedy and hypocrites. Right? They're an evil and adulterous generation. So he gives them this warning. Another context is in the book of Mark chapter 4, between two parables. There's the parable of the sower and the parable of the weeds. Right? We'll talk about them in just a little bit later on. But if you really want to, spend a lot of time talking about the parables, we've got some parables courses you can come back and take. Okay, but I don't want to spend too long talking about it. But in the middle of it, he says it's a lamp brought in to be put under a basket, under a bed, and not on a stand. Right? So you got a lamp, you bring it in there. What are you going to do with it? Oh, I'll just put it under the bed. No, that's foolish, right? Now maybe if you're looking for something under the bed, you want to get it down there, right? But be careful, don't set your bed on fire, right? Then get it out of there, put it up on the stand so you can see, right? Have you ever been in the dark, and someone's there and everything's fine, but somebody grabs the light to go look for something and now, hey, I was using that, right? This is a problem. Now he says here this, for nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, to be made visible. Nor is there anything secret except to come to light. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. And he said to them, pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And still more will be added to you. For to the one who has, more will be given. From the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Now there's a few things here that we need to talk about. Alright? One, we'll look at this statement in red. Anyone who has ears to hear, let him hear. This is something that Jesus said a few times, and it shows up in Revelation also. If you go back, again, what happens? Jesus just told this parable of the sower. He's about to tell another parable. And his disciples come to him and they say, why are you talking to the people in parables? Right? Why are you using these stories? What does it mean? A guy's throwing his seed on the ground and the birds come and eat it, and some of it lands on the rocks and it springs up, and then the sun makes it hot and it dies, and some lands in the thorns and it grows, but then doesn't produce anything, it gets choked out. But some of it lands on the ground that is good and it makes a crop. What does that mean? Why did you say that? Right? And Jesus explains to them, I'm speaking in parables because that's what God told me to do. Because go back to the book of Isaiah. God said that he was going to speak to the people in parables so that they wouldn't understand what he was talking about. Have you ever heard that explanation that Jesus used parables to make things relatable to people so that they could understand? That's not really true. I mean, maybe part of it's true. Most of it, he used parables so they wouldn't understand what he was talking about. That was the point. They'll hear a story and they say, okay, that's interesting, Jesus. Okay. Right? Now, if they wanted to know, they could find out. Right? If they were really interested to hear his teaching, just like the disciples, could you explain the parable to us? And so he explains it. Right? But just the normal people that are just there, they just want Jesus to feed them. They just want Jesus to heal them. They just want to see what's going to happen when the leader's over here, or they just want to see what's going to happen. They don't really care about Jesus' message, right? So in Isaiah, God says, you go around and you tell these people, so that seeing, they'll see, but they won't really perceive it, right? Or hearing, they'll hear, but they won't understand. God says, because if they did see, if they did understand, then they would turn toward me and I would heal them. And that's a very interesting kind of thing. That God sent a prophet, more than one prophet, to tell people something that they wouldn't believe. So that they wouldn't believe it. Right? Because God said if they do believe it, then I would help them. But they don't want to believe it. They're wicked, they're not listening, right? And so that's what Jesus says, if you have ears to hear this, you need to hear it. Right? If God's letting you understand this, you need to listen. Because some people, it's going to be like in the parable. The word is going to come onto the path. It's going to bounce along. It's not going to penetrate. That heart is not going to understand the Word of God. Because each soil, each type of ground represents a different heart. And the path is one that doesn't understand the Word. And Satan comes, takes it away, snatches it away. Right? Just like the birds eating the seed off the ground. Right? Some people are going to hear and they're not going to understand. Some people are going to understand. Right? And they're going to be excited. Wow, this is amazing. Right? And they're going to receive it with joy, but they don't have any root. And when trouble comes, they're out. Right? That's the next part of the parable. Then others will receive it, and they'll grow, but it's choked by the deceitfulness of wealth. Right? Remember what was the problem with your eye being bad and having a love of money, that kind of stuff? The deceitfulness of wealth, the cares of this world, they choke it. They make the word unfruitful. It doesn't multiply. Right? It produces something. It makes a plant, but when you go plant seed and you take rice and you plant it in a field, what do you want? Do you want grass? Or you want more rice? Right? You want the seed to multiply. Right? You don't want to just plant a bunch of grass. Right? You can plant anything if you just want grass. And that's the other parable, the parable of the weeds. One guy plants good wheat, and then his enemy comes in and throws in the tares. As far as the grass is concerned, it looks the same. Right? But one you can eat and one you can't. Right? One is going to make a crop and one is worthless. Just uses up the soil. But then that last soil in the first parable, the seed lands on it, those are people that understand the word, they accept it, and the seed multiplies. And there's a crop that's 30 or 60 or 100 times more than what was sown. Right? That's amazing. That's what we need to be. That's the people with their light on a stand. You have this little light. And yeah, you could have it under here and it would work for a little bit. Right? Or you could put it out there where everybody can see. Right? So is it going to get choked and die? Is it going to set your house on fire because you put it under a basket? Or is it really going to light up everything and be useful to people? Right? He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And he says, pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now this is another thing that Jesus says a couple times. He says it in the Sermon on the Mount about judging. Right? Make sure that, don't judge lest you be judged. Right? Okay. Well, it's also about your productivity. Right? You're going out, you're doing these things. Right? Well, be careful. Because whatever measure you use, it's going to be measured to you. Right? And more will be added. So in other words, if you give a good measure, right, then if you're generous, people are going to be generous back to you. God is going to be generous back to you. God is going to bless you with that. Right? So that you can continue doing it. But at the end, for the one who has, more will be given. From the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Now again, we can see that in the parable of the sower. That one person, that's the path, they don't understand, they get the word. Everybody in the parable gets the word. Right? But that one, even what he has is taken away. Right? But the good soil multiplies. Right? Now Jesus also uses this statement in another place. And we'll go ahead and bring over to the next slide, just because it's the same, but in Luke After the parable of the sower, again, we got basically the same thing. To the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. That statement appears in three contexts. One here is the parable of the sower, and the other is the parable of the talents. All right? Let me bring this up here. The parable of the sower, the parable of the talents is in Matthew chapter 25. You remember that story? There's a man that's going on a journey, calls 3 of his servants, and he gives them some money, each according to their ability. So he knows, okay, this servant is very capable. I'm going to give him 5 talents, and that's a certain weight of gold or silver or something. Give it to him. He's going to put that to use, right? This other servant, I know he's not as capable, but he's still capable. I'm going to give him 2 talents, right? And the last guy, I'm going to give him 1. Right? He says, I'm going to go away, put this to work. When I come back, we'll have an account. We'll see what happened. He goes on a long journey. Well, what happens? The 2 guys that got the most, they immediately go to work, right? And they end up doubling what they got. Right? The 5-talent guy gets 5 more. The 2-talent guy gets 2 more. But the 1-talent guy, he thinks, no, this is dangerous. Right? My master, he's a tough guy. I don't want to lose this talent of his. So he goes out, he digs a hole, buries it in the ground, covers it up, and waits for his master to get back. Right? So when the master comes, he's very happy with the first 2 guys. He says, wow, come, enter the joy of your master. You've done all this great stuff. This is amazing. But when the other guy gets called up, he goes out, he digs up his talent, he says, here, I give it back to you. I give you back exactly what you gave me. You didn't lose it, right? But is the master happy with that? No. Right? You just hid it in the ground. You didn't do anything, right? And the guy even tells the master, I knew you were a harsh man. You do some, you gather where you don't sow, you do all this stuff. I didn't want to lose your thing, so I put it in the ground and gave it back to you. And the master is just like, you wicked, lazy servant. Right? You didn't do anything. You didn't even take it to the bank and give it to the banker so that he could do something with it, and when I got back, I would get a little interest. You could have at least put it in the bank. But you just buried it in the ground. What was the point of that? So it's important, right, that when we're living and doing these things, that we don't take what God gives us and say, well, as long as I can give God back exactly what He gave me, that's probably enough, right? No. And probably we're not going to do that. We're just going to take what He had and waste it. That's what happened to a lot of the Israelites, right? God blessed them with all these things, and what did they do? They turned to idols, they turned to other nations, they gave all their gold and incense and stuff away, right? They wasted it on everything else. So what happens to that 1 talent that was with the guy, the worthless servant? That servant gets thrown outside, but his talent gets given to the guy who had 10. Right? So, the one who has, more will be given. The one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Right? And that happens a lot in life. Right? The rich get richer and the poor get poorer sometimes. Now sometimes the poor get less poor. Sometimes the rich lose a lot of money. Right? But generally speaking, if you're the kind of person that's not going to put any effort into anything, well then you're not going to make it very far. Right? And there are a lot of different reasons why people are poor. Right? And if you look, a lot of people start out poor and end up, they do okay. Right? Some of them end up being super rich. And some of them stay poor. Right? It's kind of hard. I mean, that's kind of the way life works. In a lot of ways, in a lot of areas. Right? If you're really good at your job, you can really excel. Right? If you're not, you just kind of go through life. Right? So what about with what God has given us? Again, in the parable of the talents, He knows how much we're capable of. Right? He gives opportunity according to ability. Right? The other parable is the parable of the minas. Very, very similar story, except there's like 10 servants, and they all get the same thing. They all get one mina. But in that story, one of the guys, he's like, hey, you got one mina, but now I've got 10. Right? I got 10 more. The other guy's like, oh, you got your one mina, and here's 2 or 3. And there's some, and then again, there's the one guy, and well, I had it, I put it in my drawer. Here, I wrapped it up in this handkerchief. Here, you want it back? Put it in my panyo. I'll give it to you. I kept it safe. It's still shiny. Okay? And again, that's not what the master wanted. Right? So they give it to the guy that has a bunch, and they're like, but he's already got 10. He's like, yeah, because he knows what he's doing, and he deserves more. So we're going to give it to him. Right? But you, wicked, lazy servants, didn't do anything. You get nothing. Right? I mean, at least enjoy. He should have at least tried to enjoy what he'd given him in the first place. That would have been better than wasting it. Would have been better for him. I don't know. Don't do that, by the way. Don't say, well, God's giving me this. I'll just waste it all because it's my only chance. He doesn't appreciate that. But these are the contexts of these guys. And Jesus tells these things what? To show that we got to work. Right? You can't just coast through Christianity, right? You can't say, well, the master doesn't really want me to do anything, or I don't really know what to do, right? He knows what you're capable of. He's given you opportunity. You got to do something with it, right? God has shown this light into our hearts. What are we going to do with it? So we see these different comparisons here, and the Lord gave all of them something to be productive with. Some of them wasted it. Some of them didn't do anything at all. And so think about that. Being the light of the world. Well, what does that have to do with it? What are we going to do? Are we going to be a productive light? Or are we going to be useless? All right? Go back to the salt of the earth. What happens when the salt becomes useless? You throw it out. All right? Let it get trampled because it's no good. Okay, so then there's this other statement that we saw here in the middle. Nothing that is hidden will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not come to light. So Jesus takes this statement and he uses that in 2 other contexts. Okay? In Matthew chapter 10 and Luke chapter 12. Okay? Now these are both chapters in which he's talking about the coming persecution for his disciples. Right? In fact, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus has called his disciples to him. He's called the 12. He's telling them, okay, I want you to go out. You're going to go to every town in Israel. He said, I don't want you to bring a bag. I don't want you to bring any money. I don't want you to bring anything. Just you got your shirt. You got your sandals. Go. Right? You'll get taken care of on the way. You go into a town, you preach there, you talk to them, somebody in the town is going to take care of you, you eat what gets put in front of you, don't bounce around from house to house trying to find better food or better lodgings, just stay there, work there until you've told them what you need to tell them, and if they accept it, great, you put a blessing on that house that kept you there. If they reject you, then you just walk out of town and shake the dust off of your feet. You don't even want the dirt from that town sticking to you. Right? And you go on somewhere else. And he tells him, you're not going to finish going through the cities of Israel before you see the Son of Man coming. Right? So, this was a sort of kind of a one-time mission that they were sent on, going through Israel. Right? He's going to send them out again later on, where he makes them a little more capable. Right? But he warns them. He gives them some warnings that aren't just applying to that particular moment, but are going to apply to the future. When they're going to get arrested, and they're going to go before governors and kings and all these different guys. But let's look first at Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 1. And again, this is a slightly different context, but he's warning his disciples, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Right, so there's all these crowds that are coming to listen to Jesus. The Pharisees are these religious leaders. They're very strict. about following the law, about following their traditions, right? They're very religious. They're very clean, right? But they're hypocrites because they don't really care about justice. They don't really care about faithfulness and mercy, right? There are people out there that have broken the law and, oh, you broke it. You're out. You're a sinner. You're a wicked person, right? They're not trying to help anybody, right? They're trying to maybe convert people to their religion, to follow all their traditions. Make sure you wash your hands the right way, you know. Make sure you wear the right clothes. Write your scriptures on a little piece of parchment and roll it up into a leather box and put it on your head so it sticks out. And, you know, now you've got the Word of God on your head. Because that's what Moses said to do. Bind this to your head and to your hand. So they literally tied it to their head. Right? And they tried to make their boxes really wide and really long. And then you think, wow, that guy's got a lot of Bible on his head. Right? Look at that. You know, if I just got a hat and just put this up here like this, right? You would think, that guy's really stupid is what you would think. You wouldn't think he's really religious. Right? But they thought that they were very religious. And they were very faithful to God by doing that. So Jesus said, watch out for those guys. Because they're hypocrites. Don't listen to them. Right? He says, but there's nothing covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. Right? Those guys are hypocrites. The people don't know it right now. I mean, some of them do. But it's going to be revealed that these guys are hypocrites. Right? But he also says, accordingly, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light. And whatever you have whispered in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. Now, again, what's he warning them? He's warning them against hypocrisy. Right? He knows the Pharisees are hypocrites, but he's telling them, don't be a hypocrite. Don't say one thing out in public and then in secret you're saying something else. Because whatever you're saying, everybody's going to find that out. Right? This secret life that you're trying to live, it's going to be found out. So don't do it. He says, I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body. And after that, have no more than they can do. Right? They're going to get attacked. They're going to get beaten. They're going to get arrested. They're going to get killed. He says, don't be afraid of that. Who cares if you die? It's fine. Because after they kill you, they can't do anything. You know, if you have a worldly, physical mindset, that seems pretty bad. They killed me. But this life on earth is such a small part of life. Right? He said, don't be afraid of that. Here's who you should fear. Fear the one who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Right? Because then what are you going to do? I tell you, fear him. It says, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 cents? You see all these little birds flying around? That's the Eurasian tree sparrow. That's the exact same bird that Jesus is talking about. Those little birds everywhere, you know, the little ones. 5 of those, they're pretty cheap. Right? He says, but not one of those birds is forgotten before God. Right? They're almost worthless, but God knows every one of them. He says, look, the hairs on your head are all numbered. Right? Is there a little, like it's engraved on there or something? Like, what does that mean? So God knows, right? So he says, don't be afraid. Don't fear. You're worth more than many sparrows. Oh, we couldn't go on here. So don't fear. You're worth more than many sparrows. That's good because sparrows are really cheap. I hope I'm worth more than like a whole truckload of sparrows. Right? He says, everyone who confesses me before men, the Son of Man shall confess before the angels of God. But whoever denies me before men shall be denied before the angels of God. And whoever speaks a word against the Son of Man it shall be forgiven him. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit, it shall not be forgiven him. There's one more verse I want to look at. We're going to pause here at this part. He who denies me before men shall be denied before the angels of God. Alright? He who confesses me, I'll confess him. Do you think that applies to our topic? We're talking about being the light of the world. We're talking about not hiding that light away. Because why would you hide it? Right? If you're a Christian, if you know the truth, if you've had the light of God shine into your heart, why would you hide that? Maybe because you're afraid. Maybe because you're ashamed. And so Jesus said, well, if you're going to be ashamed and hide your light under here where no one can see it, I'm ashamed of you. That's not going to go well for you. Right? So if you got the light, you need to shine it around. Because otherwise Jesus is going to say, I don't remember seeing you before. Right? Have I seen you anywhere before? I don't think so. You've been in the dark. I can't see you over there. And so he tells them also, when they bring you before the synagogues and rulers and authorities, don't be anxious about what you should speak in your defense or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you are to say. Right? Don't worry about the defense that you have to make. You're going to have to make it, but God will give you the words. Right? And they have it. Now, Matthew has said a lot of the same things, but we're going to pick up in chapter 10, basically right after that. He says it's not you who speak. It's the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Right? And he tells them this. This is amazing. Brother will deliver up brother to death. A father, his children will rise up against their parents, cause them to be put to death. And you'll be hated by all on account of my name. But it is the one who endures to the end who will be saved. We saw that just a minute ago in Luke. But this idea of families turning against each other, right? That's what's going to happen, right? You kind of look at Jesus, even his own brothers didn't believe in it, right? And I didn't mention it, but that's kind of in the context of some of these things. Right after Jesus says this thing about, don't hide your lamp under a basket and such and that, then his mother and brothers come to him and they're looking for him. They're trying to talk to him. Right? Now, why are they trying to talk to him? Well, maybe his mother's trying to encourage him. Maybe she's kind of worried about him. Right? Does she believe in him? I hope so. Right? She's seen a lot of stuff. She's had a lot of visions. She's had a lot of things. She was a great lady. Right? But you think that, go back, we talked about her in the temple, right? And Simeon, praising God and all this stuff. Well, you know what he told Mary? Was that a sword is going to pierce your own soul because of this kid. Right? She knows kind of what's supposed to happen. And she maybe kind of doesn't want that to happen. Just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he doesn't really want to do it. Right? He's like, can we find a different way? I'd really like to not get crucified in the morning. Right? And so Mary's maybe thinking, there's all these people. He can't eat. He can't go anywhere. There's rumors people are trying to kill him. Like last time we were in Nazareth, they tried to push him off a cliff. Maybe you should stop. Right? Now, we don't know exactly what they were going to say. Right? We know that his brothers didn't believe in him. At one point they were like, what are you doing out here? Go to Jerusalem. Right? That's where all the big city is. That's where you're going to get the crowds. But the people that are trying to kill him are in Jerusalem. So trying to tell him to go there and do his miracles there, that's not great. But here they are. So Jesus says, who are my mother and brothers? Right? My mother and my brothers, they're the ones that believe in God, that obey what God says. Right? That's my brother and my sister and my mother. Right? The physical relationship, not so important. Right? And so, just like here, our family might turn against us. You want to be a light? What happens if you shine a light into a dark place and there's somebody in there that doesn't want to be seen? get your light out of my business. Right? They might try to get rid of that light. Right? He says, you'll be hated by all on my account. But it's the one who endures to the end who will be saved. You've got to endure to the end. It says, whenever they persecute you in this city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you shall not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he becomes as his teacher, and the slave as his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? Therefore do not fear them. For there is nothing covered that will be revealed, not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. Alright, don't be afraid. Everything's going to be made known, right? And now a little different. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light. Remember he told them before, what you say in secret is going to be, people are going to hear about it. So he's telling, what I tell you in secret, you tell everybody else. Right? You know I told you what the meaning of that parable was? You go tell somebody. Right? What I whisper in your ear, you proclaim along the housetops. Jesus is not afraid of being called a hypocrite. Because what he says in private is the exact same thing that he says in public. Right? He just has to say it again in private because they didn't understand. They didn't get it. Right? They were arguing about something or whatever. They didn't understand. How many times has he dealt to tell them the same thing over and over again? You ever thought about that? Sometimes you read the Gospels and you see, Jesus says something here. Well, he says something very similar over here. Right? Some people say, that's just the same thing. They copied and pasted it over there. They're trying to put it together. If you were to read everything that Jesus says in the Gospels that we have, do you know how long that would take to read it out loud? Just at a normal pace, it would take about 4 hours to read through everything. Now, some of those are exactly the same thing, right? It's exactly the same circumstances. He's teaching the same thing. So if you cut all that out, it's about 2.5 hours. That's how much teaching we have from Jesus. 2.5 hours. He taught for 3 years. Right? You think he didn't maybe say the same thing over and over and over again? He probably repeated himself a time or two. The Lord's Prayer, his disciples say, hey, teach us to pray. Right? Well, maybe some other disciples wanted to know how to pray and he had to teach them again. Right? There's 5,000 people out there listening to him. You ever had 5,000 people try to listen to you? They can't hear you. This little group right here, they're going to be able to hear me. But over there, well, guess what? You guys go tell them later what I said. And I'll go over there and tell them. Right? And I'm going to teach you 12 guys so that you know. I'm going to teach you 70 guys so that you know. But even with 70 people, teaching 5,000 people, that's like 70 people for each one of those 70. Right? So Jesus had to repeat himself a lot. A lot. But he says, look, you're not going to be above me. You're not above your teacher. A slave is not above his master, but it's enough that you become like your teacher. It's enough for the slave to be like his master. He says, and if they've called the head of the house Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? And you remember when he cast out that demon, and they're saying, it's by the spirit of, they're saying that Jesus is the prince of demons. So if they said that about me, imagine what they're going to say about you. Right? Because really, Jesus is perfect. And they called him demon-possessed. His disciples, they're pretty good guys, but they're not perfect. What are they going to say about him? Where did I go? Yeah, therefore, do not fear that there's nothing covered that will not be revealed. Nothing hidden that will not be made known. Okay, we gotta go next. Do not fear those who kill the body but are unable to kill the soul. Rather fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. Again, we saw the sparrows, hairs of your head being numbered. And this statement again, everyone who shall confess me before men, I'll confess him before my Father who is in heaven. Whoever will deny me before men, I'll also deny him before my Father in heaven. You've got to keep that in mind. Right? That's what shining your light is all about. It's confessing Jesus by your actions, not just your words. And he says, don't think that I came to bring peace on the earth. Right? Oh, he brings up peace. That's good, right? Well, it's a different kind of peace. He says, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I came to turn people against each other. Families are going to be destroyed because of me. You say, well, that's terrible. Well, it's not his fault. Right? It's because not everyone in the family is going to believe. Not everyone in the family is going to want to be faithful to God. Right? They're going to turn against each other. A man's enemies will be the member of his household. So he says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. You love son or daughter more than me, you're not worthy of me. You don't take your cross and follow me, you're not worthy of me. He says, I'm sending you to your death. And he's telling them that right here. That's what this chapter is about. You are going to die for this. Are you willing to do it or not? Alright? He who has found his life shall lose it, but he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. He who receives me receives him who sent me. Right? You accept Jesus, you accept the Father. If you receive a prophet in the name of a prophet, you shall receive a prophet's reward. If you receive a righteous man in the name of a righteous man, you'll receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, I say he will surely not lose his reward. It's a beautiful thought. I got one more thing to talk about quickly before we get to the end. And that's the glory of the Lord. We see in the story of Moses and in a little verse by Paul that we looked at before. If you go back to the Exodus chapter 34, Moses is there. They're at Mount Sinai. He's gone up. He's talked to God for 40 days and 40 nights. He's come down. He's gone up again and talked to God for 40 days and 40 nights. He would go into the tent of meeting where they had the tabernacle and all of that, and he would talk to God in there. And when he came out, his face would glow, right? But when he'd go talk to God, he would take the veil off because he had put a veil over his face. Because when he came out and his face was glowing, everyone was like, why is his face glowing? That's really... right? So he would cover his face so they couldn't see that it was glowing. But more importantly, so they couldn't see that it stopped glowing. Right? Because when he talked to God, he's reflecting the glory of God. His face is glowing. But, if it goes out after, I don't know, hours, days, it starts to fade. And you don't want to be the prophet that had a glowy face and then you don't have a glowy face. They're like, how come your face isn't glowing, huh? Right? Are you sure God is with you? It looks like he's gone because your face isn't glowing. Right? So he would wear the veil all the time, But when he would come out of the tabernacle, he would have the veil off and he would be like, oh, look, it's glowing. And then he would put it on. So they couldn't tell that it stopped glowing. And he would replace the veil until he went in to speak with God again. Alright, so they could see his face was shining. Now Paul says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. He's comparing the old law of Moses and the new covenant. Right? The law and the Spirit. He says, if the ministry of death engraved on stones, right? The Ten Commandments carved into the stone. That came with glory, right? And if that came with glory so much that the sons of Israel, they couldn't even look at Moses' face because of the glory of his face. Right? They were afraid to look at the guy. Even though his face was fading, right? Like if they just looked for a little bit longer, maybe it would go away, right? He says, how shall the ministry of the Spirit fail to have even more glory? Right? That was the old one. Right? It wasn't even as good as this that we got. Right? We have more glory than that. And he goes on for several verses there, but in the end, in verse 18, he says, "But we all, with unveiled faces, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord Spirit." That's an interesting thought. We are being transformed into the same image, right? A metamorphosis, right? Step by step, becoming more and more like God. If we are there with unveiled face, talking to God, looking at God, being with God, then we're going to have that change, right? And we're going to reflect that. We're going to shine that out into the world, right? But what happens if we don't? Right? What happens if that glory starts to fade? Well, why would it fade? Well, because we went away from God. Right? God has shown into our hearts. This is another thing Paul says in 2 Corinthians that we talked about. God has shown the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. He's shown that into our hearts. Why? He wants us to share that knowledge with the world. He wants that salvation to reach to the ends of the earth. Right? We're lights in the world. It's that simple. We do the things that He wants us to do. Walk as children of light. Live as children of light. Go read Ephesians chapter 5. Right? Go back. We looked at 1 Peter. Right? Go to Colossians. All these things where we see the very simple things that we have to do. Things that we should avoid. Right? Don't be getting drunk and wasting your life. Right? Don't be making rude jokes and, be involved in immorality. Or don't be lying and stealing. None of those things are worth anything. Right? We need to be innocent, pure. We are lights in this crooked and perverse generation. But if we hide our light, we try to keep it to ourselves, we don't want to bother anybody about it, well, there's a consequence for that. We saw it before, right? Even what He has will be taken away. Right? So don't hide it, or it's going to go out. Let it shine. Bring glory to the ends of the earth. Let your light shine before men, that they'll see your good deeds and glorify your Father in the heavens. That's what it means to be the light of the world. So we're going to take a break.